Good evening, everybody. Hopefully there's somebody watching out there. Good evening and welcome to Bruichladdich Micro-Provenance number 7. You'll notice that since we're back here again doing this, Alan has changed slightly. Today we don't have Alan with us, we have Hunter Jackson with us. So,
good evening.
And we have the usual Rogues Gallery over here. Hopefully everybody knows Chloe and Jane and Christy. And I don't know if the technical guys over here have got a camera on them, but we've got technical support over here all looking very worried and waving. So tonight's tasting, we are going to taste some pretty special whiskey, some pretty interesting whiskey. It's all Islay grown Bruichladdich. And I'm kind of catching up a little bit because I thought this was the Octomore one, but I missed that last time. So apologies for that, but I think Joanne did a good job. I think she stood in very well. So tonight, what you say, Islay barley. It's a very big topic for us. So we have Hunter, who's a bit of a barley expert and a good guy to have around for us at the distillery and for all the farmers on Islay. So I suppose, Hunter, if you'd like to maybe tell everybody a little bit about your involvement with growing barley on Islay.
Yeah, certainly, Adam. It's my job to act really in my capacity of selling the barley and the fertiliser and the chemicals to help grow this product on Islay. So we're looking to what varieties are available, what their traits are, what's going to best suit the west coast of Scotland and its rainfall and particular difficulties. So we start from that point and then I roll that out. There's now 17 growers for the distillery, which is a great bonus because it's only a few years ago there was probably only 3 or 4. Mm-hmm. So it's becoming quite important for the local farmers to be able to participate in this. We'll maybe, you can ask me more questions about what we want as we go along. But that's really where my involvement is.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point. I think tonight, obviously, this is interactive. So if you've got any questions and you've got any points you want to bring up or ask us, we have expertise here in Hunter and amateur in myself, but I'll do a good job of telling you some stories. The girls will kind of come up with some questions, I'm sure, and we can go through some answers as we go. As I say, we're going to taste these whiskies tonight. Just to set this up a little bit, the whiskies we're going to taste. The first one we're going to taste is a Islay grown barley from 2004. And this was the very first year that we grew barley on Islay for making whiskey at Bruichladdich. The next one we're going to taste is a 2008. And after that, a 2011. And for once, when we're going to do these tastings, there's actually a little bit of a coherence about these whiskies, which is quite interesting. Obviously they're all Islay grown, but they're all matured in bourbon casks. So we're really kind of on the same playing field here, and we can look at the influence that the Islay barley brings to the style of Bruichladdich. We can look at the influence of the age. We can look at the influence of the cask. So it's not a like-for-like tasting to talk about terroir specifically, but it's interesting for those of you who know Bruichladdich, who understand the flavours in Bruichladdich, to taste something different in these casks. And I think, again, the wonderful thing about these micro-provenance tastings for me is that we're not giving you whiskey that is a finished product. We're not giving you whiskey that is something that we've spent hours blending. We're giving you single casks. We're giving you something that is a moment in time, a moment in the maturation, and it's interesting to kind of see behind the scenes, what I see when I go and look in the warehouses, the things that we think as we're tasting this whiskey and watching it grow. So not everybody would want to present to everyone else a 2011 whiskey at 61.5%, but you know what? That's natural. That's an interesting thing for us, and so that's one of the drams that we're going to taste this evening. So, are we all ready for a dram? Are we ready to dive in? I don't know. Again, because we're broadcasting around the world. In fact, actually, before we have a dram, there's a few things we need to do. It is James Brown's birthday, I believe. We're not talking about the godfather of soul here. James Brown, for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure you all do, James is a farmer at Octomore, and James is the godfather of soil. So a slight distinction, and again, nobody laughs at that joke still. So
We've
glad
just heard it so many times, Adam.
I think it gets better every time, but there you go. So happy birthday, James. I'm sure you're in the pub and not watching this, but enjoy a dram on us. The other thing was, recently I was doing some travelling, and I was in China. And I know that even though the time difference, maybe Murray Campbell, our brand ambassador out there, you might not be watching this live, Murray. If not, why not, is the first question. But I think it's a wonderful thing. Murray's going to get a few people together. He's going to taste these whiskies with some people out there, and hopefully around the world people are doing the same thing, taking into consideration the time zone. But we're all quite, when I was in China, everyone was very, very sad because Murray is leaving China. He's going to come back to Scotland. He's going to come back to Glasgow. So everyone told me how sad they were that he was coming, or he was leaving China. And I assured them that we feel very sad too that he is coming back to Scotland. So Murray, that was just for you. Now we can have a dram. So the first one we're going to taste. This is the first one we're going to taste is the first one that was grown. Good. So this is the oldest Islay barley that we have, the very first whiskey that was distilled. Hunter, if I
Thank you very much. This is from Control Farm, less than a mile from here.
Exactly that. So it's an amazing thing, I think, for us to distill whiskey, to have whiskey in our warehouses that comes from so close. Because this is the first one, it's even more special, and it's something that I've been watching over the years and watching it mature. It's a wonderful whiskey. Now, were you involved at this stage, Hunter, back in 2004?
Yes, I was. I can't remember the variety of the barley. I think it might have been Oxbridge. But we were, and we should also recognise that the field it was grown in is actually less than 100 metres from the shore as well, so there might be some influences from the sea in it. Absolutely.
Well, it's an interesting thing, and we talk so much about the terroir, about the influence of the land and the soil. Like you say, it's so close to the sea. It's an amazing thing. There will be an influence there, and we'll see the influence, as I say, when we taste through these casks. But beautiful whiskey. Now, for those of you who've been following the Islay barley story and tasting the releases as we go, you understand our approach is it's like a vintage release. So we when you look behind us here, 2006 Islay barley, 2010 Islay barley, 2007 Islay barley there as well. So this isn't something that we try and have consistency in. We try and make the same all the time. What we're interested in doing is talking about the influence of each year's harvest of the barley that we're growing. So we talk about the variety. We talk about where it's grown, who's growing it, the conditions at the time. I was getting fed some information from Jane earlier on, and we had the climate and the weather. Well, I'm sure we'll talk more about that a little bit. But we had 18 mils of rain yesterday, which is quite a lot, actually. It's quite a huge amount of rain, especially during harvest time, which is where we are just now. But when we come back to this whiskey, when we're bottling Islay barley, we tend to have the age quite young. And that's interesting for us because it allows the barley, the flavours, the influence to come through from the barley. If we have it in the cask too long, then the influence of the cask, it changes. The influence of the cask comes through more and it hides the barley. And that's what we see with this. When you look at the colour, it's a wonderful, wonderful rich colour. And again, all bourbon casks, first fill bourbon casks. When we nose that, and the reason they're all bourbon casks is Bruichladdich and bourbon, the American oak works so well together. And that is a wonderful nose, absolutely wonderful nose. I went through these a few times because they're very good drams, but also just to kind of to get some tasty notes in these flavours to begin with. And you pick up on the high strength in there. And again, this is important that all these casks are at cask strength. They are very high strength. So this one is 62.2%. What do you think?
Delicious, absolutely delicious. Yeah,
it's that strength you pick up on the nose.
You pick up the strength. It explodes in the mouth.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of spice in here, ginger and kind of cedar, that sawdust kind of note to begin with. So you're getting the influence of the oak at the beginning.
I'll take your word for it because my taste palate's not that good. I just know what I like and what I don't.
It's practice. It's all about practice. That's what it's all
I've
about.
practiced plenty.
Then we start to get fruit. We start to get orange. We start to get apricot. And it takes a bit of time, as the dram opens up, it's high strength, it needs a bit of time to get some air to it. Get lots of honey. After the honey, you start to get the barley. You start to get that digestive biscuit kind of note. You start to get the influence of that coming through, the malty notes. And this is the good bit, the taste. The texture of that whiskey is like velvet, without any water in that.
Lovely.
You feel the heat, but you taste that amazing texture. Let's get honey again, lots of vanilla, the influence of the oak coming through again. And there's fruit, but when you were saying before about how close that field is to the sea, you get a salinity on there as well. When it first touches your lips, you get that salinity. So again, when we start to think about why we grow barley on Islay and the challenges we face, and then you start to taste those flavors, then it all makes sense. This is to taste a whiskey like this, with the influence of the land and that salinity. We're right by the sea, right here. To get that influence in the whiskey is a special thing. We mature all our whiskey here as well. So not only is the barley grown right by the shore, the casks are maturing right by the shore too. A wonderful whiskey. I'm going to add a little splash of water to it. And again, at home when you're tasting this, and hopefully, this is the first time you've tasted this at home. Hopefully nobody's opened these bottles beforehand. That's cheating, remember? Hopefully this is the first time you taste it. But again, when you put some water in there and you see the way the oils come through, that opens it up beautifully. And again, you get that digestive biscuit coming through right at the top. The influence of the malt, of the barley. And that peach, that's wonderful.
Spectacular.
So that's a special dram. The very first time it was done. And I mean, do you when we think about growing Islay barley now, it's something we've been doing since 2004. This was grown in 2004 and distilled in December, so it was in the same year it was grown, it was distilled. But Hunter, do you think, back then there was what was the atmosphere? Were people receptive to growing barley? Are the farmers receptive to it as an idea?
No. Quite frankly, no.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Yeah.
It was actually seen as a small quirk by Bruichladdich doing it, and that although it was interesting for most farmers, we realised that the difficulties of rain, particularly wind, shortness of growing season, all these kind of things make it very difficult for us to grow a quality barley. However, and not to bore people with how agriculture is going generally in Europe, but what we have is falling numbers of cattle and sheep, so therefore we need less grass. And if we need less grass, you have a spare field. What will we do with the spare field? Let's put it into barley, give it a try. So it started off like that, and then once we've done it a few times, you realise there's a good relationship going between Bruichladdich and the farmers, and that you can build on something here and possibly keep this going well into the future. Now, it now looks like that is going to happen. Everybody's quite happy with it. So it has become something from a quirk to a more stable business for us all.
Do you think, like that, the idea, I mean, obviously, when Bruichladdich, reopened, and the people behind the scenes, the people driving that with a passion, and the people who were, I'm talking about Jim or Mark or Simon, their belief in that and their strength to push that. I suppose it's a nice thing for us to see. Now when we sit back and we think back to 2004, and it was difficult, but how were the farmers persuaded? What came from it?
The farmers are actually, it becomes more from the fact that Bruichladdich showed willingness to negotiate on price. And we shouldn't beat about the bush, because farmers are hard-hearted people at the best of times. And if they can make £1 where they weren't before, then they'd be very interested. And because Bruichladdich then saw the opportunity and offered what was actually in effect a reasonably good deal at the time. So it made sense then for farmers to commit to buying the equipment that you require for
Yeah.
tillage and harvest and all this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Because these things aren't cheap, you know. I mean,
No.
a second-hand combine's £25,000.
Uh-huh.
So you really have to think hard and fast if you're going to go down this route. And with Bruichladdich commitment, it actually made sense then to have a go and say, right, we'll do it for 10 years. But now some of us have been doing it for longer,
Yeah.
you know, and it's just going
Yeah.
to carry on like that.
That's it. I think, yeah, like you say, now it seems to be a well-established thing.
Yeah.
And despite the difficulties, and, you know, I mentioned there about the rainfall, and, you know, as you have barley in the ground yourself, maybe, you know, you'll be...
Yeah, that's the problem. It's in the ground and not on top of it just now.
This is very true, aye. But
Yeah.
I mean, as a year for growing, for, you know, 2017, as a grower yourself, how have you found it?
Terrible. It's been a terrible year for growing barley, and it does beg the question, why do we do it?
Yeah.
But you have to look at barley growing as probably a 5-year average and not a one-off.
Right.
So you really do. So when I look at my average over the last 5 years, it's worked out about 1.75 tonnes per acre.
Mhm.
Now, at that's not too bad. We can live with that.
Yeah.
This year we might only get 1.5 tonnes. Okay, that's fine. It still does okay, you know. Next year, because we're always optimistic, the sun's going to shine and we might get 2.5 tonnes, and all of a sudden things are rosy again, you know.
Yeah.
So it can change, but you can't take 1 year in isolation. This year is dreadful. No getting away from it.
Yeah.
If the sun doesn't shine next week, I think I'm just going to go on holiday and forget it. It can just rot.
It can stay in the ground. Aye.
It
Well,
can.
hopefully, you know, I actually today I was because it is harvest time just now, and it's I would imagine with the people we have here, who, you know, myself and Christy and Carl and everyone who's been organising this tasting, it's more by luck than design that we are tasting the Isle of Barley at the same time as the harvest. Is that
yeah.
fair, Christy?
Oh no, we orchestrated this perfectly.
Well, there you go. I stand corrected. I believe you. But it's a nice thing that, you know, at the moment we are, you know, the farmers are harvesting, and I was down at Octofad. So the logistics of this is that we have, like you say, 17 farmers growing for us, and
1,080 acres. That's any help to you?
1,080 acres. That's it's a big chunk of Islay, actually, isn't it?
Well, it's a big chunk of the arable ground in Ireland, yes.
Aye. But so the farmers are then taking their barley down to Octofad, and again, since Bruichladdich reopened, the farmers at Octofad, Neil and Andrew, Chloe, do you know any of these guys? No. They have been, you know, working with us right from the beginning, and again, Andrew is, for those of you who don't know, is Chloe's father. Andrew has been drying the barley for us and been involved in the journey, you know, as much as a huge support over the years. So at the moment, you know, I went down there this afternoon. We kind of looked to see the barley coming in and see the piles from each different farm and the moisture levels and all this kind of thing. And you know, it's an amazing thing to see what's happening just now, and like you say, the challenges that everyone is up against when you see high moisture levels in some, you know, low moisture levels in others. And again, you know, just as I think about that, the risks, and when you're talking about combine and the money involved in that, and at what point do you invest in that equipment yourself? There's a lot of farmers who don't have that, and they rely on somebody else to cut for them.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, but if I have a field of barley, and you have a field of barley, and you have a combine, are you going to cut mine first or yours first?
Depends which one's ready first.
Well, that could be a good answer. Let's say they're both ready at the same time.
If they're both ready at the same time, I'm going to cut mine first, and then I would come to you. But if you do get the variances and when they are ready, so you would go to the one that was ready first. I just had a thought there that in 1982 we grew barley at Isle Estates for Bowmore Distillery, but it was unsuccessful.
Right.
They didn't like it. It didn't do too well, and so it was given up pretty damn quick.
So they just tried it one year.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. That's a revelation, I think, to everybody in the room. We didn't know
Did you hear the
that.
gasp around the room? They did what?
But they didn't like it, you know. So that was it. This is before Jim's time. It was. I think it was Alistair Ross that was the manager at the time.
So what was the? Do you remember the reason why?
Not really. It's just it's in my dim distant past as well. I mean, it is a long time ago.
It is. 35 years ago.
And I'm sure it would have been Golden Promise, and I'm sure it would have, you know, just not been properly looked after. Because the one thing we would say is that since 2004, one thing the farmers have done very well is to increase their knowledge and ability to grow the barley to a better specification.
Yeah.
Now, it's probably in the old days that was just a complete mess and without any real knowledge of how to produce it. Whereas now we're probably, we're not at the cutting edge because you need to be in the east coast of Scotland for that, but we're certainly riding on their coattails on how to perform and make this barley grow to our benefit.
It is. I mean, I suppose again, like you say, your involvement in, kind of between the farmers and the distillery and kind of growing the knowledge of people. I mean, it's an interesting thing because, like you say, it's not as simple as putting the grain in the ground and waiting for something to happen. There's a lot of knowledge, and we were talking before about the varieties that are being grown and the knowledge because, again, I was looking through some figures here, and a couple of years ago we were growing pretty much 80%, 85% concerto on the island.
Yes, that's right.
This year the split's different. There's
45% concerto, and whereas we had 2 barleys last year, we've got 5 this year. Because there's 3 new varieties have appeared that we can use. And it should be said that what you have is there is a cycle to barley. It gets produced from the breeders, it comes forward for commercial use. It works great for probably 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 years, but by that time it seems to breed its own disease and it gets worse, and then other barleys go past it on performance, so it gets dropped off the list and we go on to another one. So in that time we've gone from Oxbridge and we've had Concerto, we've had all sorts of different barleys. Next year, who knows?
It's an interesting thing, and again that because we know this at the distillery, and I'm pretty sure, I hope I'm not setting myself up for a fall here, but you can see the barley type on there. So the
variety.
The variety, the barley type. The variety was Optic in 2004.
Yep.
We move on to the 2008, and it's Oxbridge. And the 2011 is a mixture of Concerto, Pupino, and Publican. So that's you can see the progression. We haven't been growing the same type all the time, which is
and two of these barleys, Pupino and Publican, have basically disappeared now.
It's amazing to see the way that the turnover, the change in these things. And it's, again, for us as a distillery, thinking of it from a distiller's point of view, we see, and I hear a lot from kind of this side of it, from the distilling side, that the distillers require a high yield. When essentially in a distillery we'll take the barley, they're not really worried about what type it is. They want to get the most litres of alcohol per tonne of barley, and preferably the barley at the lowest price possible, or the malt at the lowest price possible. And I think it's a really different thing at Bruichladdich, because what we're looking for is the individuality, in where the barley is grown, exploring the terroir. And for us, I think now, as we start to, or for me personally, as I start to learn more about, from people like yourself, learning more about the mechanics of growing barley, and what works in different fields, what works in different soils, what will work in different weather conditions, because I'd imagine, like you say, growing on the east coast, growing on here, you're going to get completely different suitability of barley.
Well, there are. On the east coast of Scotland, for instance, go for a low straw variety, whereas we want as much straw as we can get. Now that's just a quirk, because haulage costs so much money, we want as much straw. So that becomes one major difference between the two of us, So it's small things like that. But it all starts, when you talk about terroir, it all actually starts with a soil sample. Every field of barley has a soil sample, and we check for its nutrition and pH status and all that before it's even considered for a field of barley. So it really does start early, and then we move the whole system on, and then we try and fit what's likely to grow best in that area.
This is great, isn't it? I think how long have we been going now? This is just fascinating stuff. And I'm just thinking, I don't know if you guys have any questions or anyone coming through, or should we take some questions? We'll have a dram while we hear the question.
I'll have a dram.
Well, who'll answer them if you've got a dram?
Well, we're just preparing the answer. That's what we're doing.
So we've got a couple coming through. Do you want some taste notes first, or some?
Taste notes.
Yeah, taste notes first. Okay, so I might try and read out who's actually tweeting, but please forgive me for the pronunciation. So from Halvar von Flake, he says the first impression is quite spirity. There's lots of sawdust and fresh ground oats. From Southside Whisky, we've got crayons and plasticine, which I'm not entirely sure if that's a good thing.
I don't know if Southside Whisky.
Yeah, South
I don't know if you're drinking whiskey or not. I'm not sure.
Or maybe the children have just
Yeah,
crushed something
like
into the
that,
glass
yeah.
along the way.
Doesn't sound it.
Again, a lot of oak and leather, and a lot of the power from the wood coming through.
Yeah.
Orange, honey, herbs, quite strong and powerful, spicy, and herby.
I would agree with pretty much all of that. Maybe not the crayons, but
Well,
I don't know.
I didn't get any plasticine. No.
No. And it's interesting. I have a young daughter. Loves playing with plasticine, so maybe I'm immune to it now. Maybe it's just all over the place. But interesting notes. That's really nice to hear.
And some very interesting questions coming through on the barley. So, do you think the individual growers have an influence on the terroir?
Well, that's an interesting question. The individual growers, well, I'm sure, like you say, the soil samples that will be different depending on where the farms are.
I'm not sure the growers actually have the influence. I think that it would be wrong to say it. I think it's their farm that does, because we've probably got 4 or probably 5, in fact, different soil types. And the soil types make a difference. So we go from a very light sandy loam to a heavy clay with bits of peat and bits of, well, everything else thrown in. Yeah. So realistically speaking, I think that's more at the point. And then, of course, you've got who's beside the sea and who's a bit further away from it and so on. Yeah. So the farmer can't influence that. All he can really do is select the barley that he wants to grow and then make sure it gets all the nutrition that it requires. So that's as much as he can really do to influence it. Well, and obviously cut it at the right time.
Well, that's it. Weather dependent.
Weather dependent.
Suppose, yeah. So, what's your situation with harvesting just now?
Oh, just fantastic. One day out, combine broke down. It should hopefully be going today. Yeah. I've got about a quarter done. That's me. I think most people will be halfway done by now.
Yeah, I was a bit worried, to be honest, today, because obviously when I phoned you the other day and we had a chat about this, with being such a lovely day today, and then thinking, if your combine's going, are you going to say, do you know what, I can't turn up for tasting, I'm going to be cutting tonight,
But as Jane said, 18 mil of water yesterday means that the grounds are saturated unless you're on a light soil.
Do you know, as we think about the climate here and the challenges that you are facing right now, on the East Coast, do you kind of follow what's happening over there?
All the time, yeah. They're well through their harvest now, although they have a stop-start kind of season, but they are getting through. All the winter crops from last year are now in, and they're well through the spring barley. Right. But they are not going every day either, but they do not get the amount of rain. And to put that into perspective, Islay gets 6 to 8 inches of rain a year on average. Yeah. The East Coast of Scotland is 27.
There you go.
So they are going to have drier, better conditions to go at.
It's interesting, and then, like you say, because we can do a lot of things, we can, but we can't control the weather. No, that's nothing. We can do nothing about that. And yet, like I see, despite those figures and despite those things, we've grown over the last 13 years from one farmer. And in 2004, there was one field grown. In 2005, none. And then 2006. So really, when you think back 2006, it doesn't seem that long ago. But to build up to 17 farmers since then, against all the odds, I think is a remarkable thing.
There are only 76 farmers on Islay.
76.
And I don't think there's much chance of getting many more people to join in now. I think we're almost there. We might get the odd extra field, but that'll be about it.
Yeah. So we've covered as much of Islay as we can with barley. That's
been successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Any more questions?
Yeah. I'll try and play through them quickly because I think people are ready for their next one.
Loads of time. We've got loads of time.
Just when we're talking about rainfall, what it makes me think of is how much when you're out walking and you get absolutely soaked, how much you want to come home and drink whiskey. So thank God we've got so much of it on our doors.
It's all linked together, isn't it?
So much rain. Someone's asking how sustainable the crop is long term. So if we're growing barley on Islay, can we continue to do so for a number of years?
Yeah, I don't see any reason why not, personally.
Well, I can't see any reason why not, because as I said, you can't take it as a 1 year. It has to be a rolling average that you look at. And if you do that, then it does work out. It is worthwhile doing the barley. And as I said about the cattle and sheep, the numbers keep falling. So there's going to be a time when they'll be looking for more options to do the, to make productive land, what they're going to do with it.
Yeah.
So,
Mm.
yeah, I think it's good.
I think the interesting thing, is start thinking about the idea of, the future and what happens in the future, and with looking at the different barley varieties now. Actually, we've got 5 this year, and learning more about that. Interestingly, we've had some conversations with Westland Distillery. Now, Westland is in Seattle, so you may know that it was recently bought by Remy Cointreau. So we have a lot of contact, and we're helping each other out, just having lots of chats just now. And they have a really interesting project with, they're very active in the barleys and the varieties that are being grown out on the west coast of America. And they're using a lot of varieties that are, the place they are dealing with, who grow these different varieties, they're working with thousands of different types and grown on very, very small plots just to keep the seed going, keep the plant going. And they will maybe, on a very small scale, look at something that has good flavour or something interesting characteristics. And over the next few years, they will try and increase the seed to try and plant enough to then distill with. You never know in the future, if that's something that as we start to learn more about the varieties, we find something that is less of a conventional crop and more of a crop that's an older variety, perhaps.
Well, we would be led by the distillery on that one if there was a different kind. But quite frankly, in Europe, there are only probably 7, 8 different varieties of malt barley. So we wouldn't have that ability to do that. And I'm delighted to say that on Islay we are trialling 5 at the moment. We are actually trying, we have trial plots running, we're working away at doing it as well. So we are trying to make sure that what you get here at the distillery it suits you as well as us.
It's a good point. I'd say it goes back to when I was talking before about the yield. The yield for us is not really that interesting. Don't tell the accounts department about that.
No, but it has to be reasonable.
Of course it has to be reasonable. And this is the interesting thing that we of course we check the yield. We constantly watch the yield, and it's more an indication for us. We know with this Victorian equipment, we're not pushing for the same yield everyone else is going to get. We're distilling differently. It's a different mindset almost. And of course, we want a good yield. We don't want to be inefficient. But the interesting thing for us is watching how the flavour. Because we're making whiskey for flavour, and that's the thing that drives us, is to explore the flavour. And as we talk about barley varieties, actually, Alan, who ran away earlier on, Alan recently was talking to some of the maltsters and secured some Golden Promise, which, like you say, hadn't been grown since the 80s or 90s.
Well, it's a long time.
So there was some grown in Scotland, and we distilled that a few weeks ago because it was interesting. It was a lot more expensive. And the yield was a lot less, but it was interesting to see the way that spirit will develop over the years and try something new.
Good.
Now, I hear some corks getting popped, so obviously maybe that's a subtle hint, Christy.
Unfortunately, it's only water.
Oh, never mind. Okay.
I still have to be able to speak by the end of it, unfortunately.
Well,
one last question from Geraldine Besnard, who I think is Lugaric to us, in our Glasgow office, is wondering how long the barley is to stay at octafad before malting.
Interesting, yeah. So we will, this is kind of more to do with the logistics of growing barley, logistics of distilling it, because we have so much. I mean, if I look back on my sheet here, last year we took in 1,371 tonnes of barley. Now that's a large proportion of our needs for the year, really. So once it has been dried down to the right level, it will go into a dormancy, and after that dormancy period, it will then be able to be malted. And so we have to, with our distilling program, we have to think very carefully throughout the year of what we can distill, when we can distill it, and be ready for the next harvest. So it's our program. It's quite interesting. We start off usually with bare barley, or the regional trials where we take barley from different areas of Scotland. And then we start to move into our Islay barley from the previous year. So earlier on this year, we were distilling the Islay barley grown last year. And only once we have got that clear, once we have basically shipped it from octafad all the way up to Inverness to be malted and brought back, once that shed is empty in octafad, then we can start to take it the next harvest. But we have to get it clear before the harvest. So we have to think carefully about how we do that. And again, the dormancy period is, Hunter, correct me if I'm wrong, about 6 weeks.
It will be 6 weeks,
Mhm.
yeah, it'll be
Yeah.
6, nearly 7.
Yeah.
So when does that mean you shift to barley, which I believe the question was, Adam?
I don't know. I tried to avoid that. Yeah, but we would tend to find that after that dormancy period, we would start to move it up. And so at the moment, let's say the harvest is going on the east coast.
Yeah.
So although we're thinking about the logistics of us, we also have
Mhm.
to take into consideration beds maltings.
When it's going to be ready. Yeah.
So beds maltings, they cannot malt at the same time as they dry up in Inverness. So they shut down the maltings. So they have to take all the barley in, get it dried and stored before we can then send any barley out to be malted. So we have to take all these things into consideration. So the simple answer is, Geraldine, I'm not going to tell you. No, the simple answer is we have to go through these periods. So it's usually towards the end of the year and into kind of November, we'll start to shift it up to Inverness. And as long as we get that all through, so we can get it all malted and brought back to us by harvest time, we should be okay. Should be okay. Hopefully that's done the trick. Now can we have a dram?
Yeah, by all means.
Okay.
Don't wait for me.
So the next whiskey we will taste, hopefully you've all been patient and waited, is a 2008 Islay grown barley. And, sorry, that was terribly rude of me. After you.
That's quite all right. I'm sure there'll be some left.
So, interestingly enough,
yeah.
this barley is grown on Sunderland farm, which is not very far away. Again, very, very close. Mind you, nowhere is really very far away in Islay, which is interesting. Sometimes we think if we drive for half an hour, it's a long journey, but
Depends if you get stuck behind a tractor or not.
at this time
From
of
someone
year,
who commutes
yeah.
half an hour every day, sometimes it's incredibly frustrating.
It can be, but then you need to leave work earlier and you'll be okay. I need to leave home earlier. So this 2008, again, it's not an old whiskey, you know, it's an interesting whiskey because we are again looking at the cask types, we're looking at the age. When you nose that, again, it's the influence of the cask is less, a lot less. Again, you get that heat. You know, we're not taking something that is a finished product here. This is a work in progress. This is one of a series of casks that is still maturing. So distilled in December 2008, and again, interestingly, as I was talking there about the logistics, usually what we harvest one year, we distill the next. But as we go back, back to 2008, the first few years we were doing this, it was, grown, harvested in 2008, but also distilled in the same year, in December. So this is only 8 years old. When you look at the colour, a little bit paler, again, because it's been in the cask a little bit less, the influence of the cask is slightly less. But it looks, it's still a very, very healthy colour. And I always think, sometimes, people will think that the colour of a whiskey doesn't tell you very much because it's artificially coloured to make it consistent all the time. Wonderful thing about Bruichladdich, as you all know, is that when we're looking at these samples, this is the natural colour. There's nothing added, nothing taken away. So this is the natural colour. So when I look at the colour, I know that this whiskey is developing well. When you look at the legs and you look at the tears and the texture again, you know that for a young whiskey, that's going to be a wonderful texture. So the nose again, so you get that heat. When we distill the Islay barley, when you nose that spirit coming off the still, when you're looking at the way it's behaving coming through the stills, it always seems more muscular. When you get that strength coming through a little bit more, you still get that in the nose here. The influence is much more about the barley. I'm getting a lot of citrus, a lot of mint, a lot of eucalyptus, and less of the sawdust and the cedar kind of oaky notes we had at the beginning. There's lemon. There is the oak there as well. There's that touch of toffee and vanilla. But now you start to get Horlicks. You start to get as it's opening up, you start to get that kind of maltiness. So again, what we're seeing is the influence of the barley by tasting this whiskey at a young age. It's something we're not afraid to do because we know there's quality in what it is we do. We know there's quality in the distillation. We know there's quality in the barley. It actually smells a bit like when you walk in the mash house and you smell that smell of the hot mash going in. You get that coming through here as well. It's fruity, it's floral. You get the apricots again. There's melon. It's wonderful. We should have a taste. think I'm the only one who hasn't tasted it yet. But
I couldn't wait.
well, slide you.
Well.
I've got the tractor drivers after me now.
Well, at least they're after you instead in front of you.
Exactly, this is very true. And you know they can't drive very fast, so you'll probably get away. You'll probably get away. Well, again, the texture, you get that viscous texture in there again. It's youthful, young, there's a lot of heat there. And again, we're talking, this is high strength, what we're on here, 63.4.
63.
Good God. 63.4. So again, I think I say this in every tasting we do, but we're tasting cask strength whiskey, but most spirit filled in Scotland will be filled into the cask at a lower strength than that.
All right.
So after 8 years of maturation, we're still at a higher strength. It's, most whiskies filled in about 63%. Wow. So on the palate there, you get the citrus, you get that sweet oak, the honey and the mint again. I think when you have whiskey of this age, cask strength, it's interesting to taste it in its natural state, but it needs a little bit of water. For those of you at home, obviously, the experienced whiskey drinkers, you'll be tilting the glass on the side, you'll be adding a little bit of water in, watching that band of gold. I don't know if this is something you've seen before, Hunter, but when you add that water in at the bottom, you split the whiskey and you get that oil on the top, and you start to see again, how the water goes on the bottom, the oil on the top, and
you can see a split.
You get that lovely texture where the oil sits on the top, and it will not drop off. We mix that around. It's amazing. You look at that viscosity in the whiskey again. It opens it up a lot. Get a lot more fruit now, a lot more citrus, a lot more apple, a lot more pear. And these are the things that we, when in the new spirit, these are the flavours we find. It tends to be, kind of underripe apples, green green pears, that kind of hard fruit. But now, as you start to smell that, it's a lot more ripe, a lot more sweeter. Apple pie.
More mellowness comes in it now.
Yeah. So again, the marzipan, the almonds, you get that nuttiness coming through again. But when I tasted that before, it'd be interesting to see with a bit of water.
It's a different dram.
A completely different dram. But we often talk about some of the whiskies, about the DNA, about the style being the same. There's that saltiness again, that marine notes, and it's from two things. Obviously, where the barley is grown, we're surrounded by the sea, we're surrounded by that air, that influence. And the casks are the same.
That'll be that damp air.
The damp air, yes, the 68 inches of water. That's the one that's doing it for sure. The casks, they're breathing that air. And again, the things we always talk about, when we talk about maturing on Islay, these really simple, fundamental things, they come through in the whiskey. That's why we do them. Yes, we have control over everything we do. We have 70,000 casks here, and I can walk out the office door and I can be looking at a cask within 5 minutes. Every single cask. It's a wonderful thing. Sometimes quicker, depending on how bad my day is going and I need to get out the office. But wonderful whiskey, an influence of the place that it's from, and that's really why these whiskies are selected. To talk about why this is important for us. Sunderland Farm, Raymond Stewart's a grower who grows more and more barley for us each year.
Yep.
And as I was talking about the logistics of this and how we keep these farms separate, if there's somebody who's able to grow enough to be able to keep a batch separate, that means we can take it up to Inverness. That means we can malt it as one batch, and bring it back and distill it as one batch. Then we keep it separate. And it's an interesting thing that over the years, as we grow and as we expand on this kind of experiment, as 13 years into this, we're still quite early in, but over the years, as we're committed to doing this, there may be a time where each farm could be distilled individually. The moment we're not able to do that with everything, but in the future, it'd be a wonderful thing.
How many tons do you need to have to be just a single farm?
It would need to be at least 100 or 120, I think, because by the time that barley has been malted down, exactly.
Right,
so we need to think about how many loads. We would want to take 4 lorry loads up, which is about 25, 28 tons. So we need to be able to take 4 loads up to Inverness, which by the time it's malted, and you lose, obviously, so much weight, so much moisture. And then through the screening process as well, you'll lose any small grains, you'll lose some of the, in some cases it can be kind of 25 to 30% of what you started with, in weight.
Depending on
you
the
lose, depending on so many things. But then that would be 3 loads that would come back to us in a lorry. Again, we can't take half loads. It becomes too complicated, too much of an issue. So if we take 3 loads back, that will do us for 1 week's production. So this year we were able to distill 3 farms separately. We had Sunderland, so Raymond Stewart at Sunderland, Ian McCarroll, Island Farm, and James Brown at Optimal.
Good.
So it's the start of the journey, it's the start of being able to do that. But it's an interesting thing. Do we have any comments from the hot desk on dram number 2?
Absolutely. Let me just scroll down my bloody screen now. Generally, we're getting a lot more of peat notes coming through on this one, which I know that Bruichladdich is always unpeated, but do you know where the peaty flavour comes from?
It's interesting that there's a smokiness that's sometimes picked up, and I'm not really getting it too much here, but you find with first fill bourbon, because of the char in the cask, sometimes you pick up a smokiness from that, and especially in the younger spirit, you'll get that more, because again the caramel, toffee, vanilla, the standard kind of flavours to rhyme off from a bourbon barrel, they won't have developed to the same level, but you'll get that smokiness from the char, which is in contact with the whiskey right at the beginning. But interesting, a little bit of smoke there.
Again, lots of apple and peach in the nose, malted barley. Again, less oak and less leather, but more butter. And we're having pencil shavings this time, so we've moved on from crayons to pencil shavings.
It's the natural progression.
We're having an arts and crafts evening.
The biro next.
In dram number 3, we've got some biro in there,
And from Jason in Ghent, we've got hints of watermelon and a very sweet taste going to licorice later on, which I quite like.
That is quite nice, that's lovely. I think, again, that sweetness, those coming from the bourbon cask, coming from the spirit, that maltiness that's coming through in the barley, you get that lovely sweetness, and it's a classic kind of style, those flavours that are coming through, it's a classic Bruichladdich kind of style. So very interesting, very good.
I've got some very technical questions coming through.
Over to
Should
you,
we start with an easy one?
This will be yours.
So let's start with the Gisa problem. That's less technical.
Our Gisa problem? Yes. Yes. The geese are a problem insofar that the migratory geese come to Ireland the 3rd week in October, by which time the harvest is finished, so they're not a problem then. But they don't leave until the middle of April. Now, normally you would want to have your barley in the ground at the beginning of March, middle of March-ish, to give you a longer growing season. The longer the growing season, the more yield that you actually achieve. So we only get about 140 days, because you have to wait till the geese go, because if you plant the barley, they'll eat the seed. If you plant it even earlier and the barley comes up, they'll eat that as well. So we have this problem where we have to wait until the middle of April before we can actually start. Compounded with that, we have local geese that never leave the island, and they come along and they start eating the barley in July into August. So we've then got them there all the time, but I have to say we shoot them. We are quite able to shoot them. We have licenses, and in an open season, the open season has been extended to allow us to shoot more of them. So we do our best to protect the crop as much as possible, but yes, geese are a problem.
Do you think growing barley in Islay and having almost the crop for the geese to have has encouraged them to stay, or would have they been there anyway?
Well, they were never here. They were actually introduced onto the island probably 20 to 25 years ago in a small number, and they have just increased. But they've increased on Islay and Tiree and Lewis and Harris and Orkney and Shetland. Now, if you know your geography, you'll see that's right down the whole of the north to the west coast of Scotland, and they're becoming a pest everywhere. And although we have maybe 5,000 or 6,000 of them in the summer, it's nothing compared with the 10,000 in Tiree or the 60,000 in Orkney. So it is becoming a real major problem for everybody to try and figure out how to well, basically farm in the face
Yes,
of pests,
yeah.
which they are, I'm afraid, you know.
Yeah, no, that's it. It's an interesting thing, and again, we always talk about the difficulties of growing barley on Islay, but I think it's really interesting to talk about what they actually are, because it's to be able to do that, it's the weather, it's the geese.
Well, the geese are limiting our yield by 3/4 of a tonne an acre. You know, it really is what it comes down to. That's what they're limiting it by.
By not being able to get it in the ground.
by not being able to get in the
sooner,
ground. And in 2015, they ate nearly 60 acres out of 1,000, roughly, of barley that they got away with. Now, that's a big percentage, and you know, that is hard cash to the actual farmer. Now, it wasn't one farmer, I have to say. It was, it was over 13 farmers.
That would have been hard luck.
But still, in all, it's quite a problem, and one that we just have to face head on and deal with as best as we can.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We good?
Yes.
Good.
I'm excited about this next one.
This next one, next question.
Yeah, so from YouTube, Chloe's got someone come in who I'm afraid I don't know their name, but their username is GRO5E, so very pithily named there. And he's wondering if you've got a list of barley varieties that are approved for brewing and distilling each year, and whether or not you're limited to that list.
Yes. Very, very simply, yes. There is a list produced each year by the Scottish Agricultural College, and this is made up from trials that are ongoing every year in 3 places in Scotland. Right, so they will check it for, and if I was to dash over there, I would be able to tell you all the things. But there's maturity, which is when it's ripe. There's straw length, straw strength, disease resistance, brackling, which means when the head comes over and it falls off onto the ground, that's brackling, so you don't want that either. And screenings, stuff like this, So there's a whole load of these things go to make up what would be acceptable for a malt barley. Yeah. And then on top of that, they go off and they do the micro screenings for distilleries, and they'll say, well, actually, it's a provisional, but you're only getting 370 litres per tonne, so we don't want it.
So do they have to stick to it, though, or can they, if we were to be seriously rogue and say, we want to distill this barley variety?
No, you could buy it. I mean, Golden Promise is no longer on the list. It's a great example. Now there's Optic, Bear, they're not on the list. You can grow that. But we wouldn't want to grow that as farmers because they're not on the list, and therefore they don't come with a certificate to allow us to grow it. Because the certificate is quite an important thing. If you haven't got that, the Department of Agriculture can come along, see what you're growing, ask you where you got the seed, and if you haven't got a very satisfactory explanation for them, you will be fined. Okay. So it really does. This is what we want to grow. We're all happy doing that, and it's and they're generally the leading edge of what's being there. So that's what we want to grow.
Is that a legal requirement as well? Not talking just within barley, but within the wider variety of plant growth. Is it kind of policed because they don't want people to grow crazy things, for example? To
be screened and checked, because once upon a time ergot was endemic in Britain and is a very toxic poison. So you have to make sure that, and it can come back into a crop of wheat or barley or rye or any of these things. So you've got to be very careful that you're screened for that. So if you just go and grow something, whatever it is, and it's not screened, then there is a risk that you're doing that. The other thing is that one breeder somewhere has bred Golden Promise. So if you kept your seed and you grew it, well, he's no longer getting his royalties for it. And that then becomes illegal. You're supposed to pay royalties. So, realistically, I as a farmer, I could grow Golden Promise, but I would have to declare how many tons of seed I bought and pay the appropriate amount of money so the breeder got his bit.
It's a very interesting topic, actually. This whole kind of thing, and we could probably do another, probably start for another hour talking about that kind of thing and the interesting points of it. But I think like you say, we distill bare barley, and the Golden Promise and these type of things. So from our point of view, whatever we find interesting to distill, we will distill.
You can grow,
it was quite interesting. Carl, who's our head of communications, was telling us in the office the other day that because bare barley wasn't something that was giving the higher yield, it was something that's not being grown as on on such an industrial scale as some of the other varieties, and that now we're working in partnership with the University of the Highlands and Islands, the Agronomy Institute in Orkney, and they're starting to find that that beer's actually got a much wider genetic code. Is that correct? Because it's not been kind of forced and subjected to such high yielding situations. Have you heard anything about that? Am I on the right lines?
No, I
know
think
what you did, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because you like you say, really for the distilling industry, for the vast majority of it, it's being bred for yield, for the farmer, and also to make it a worthwhile crop to grow, but also for the distiller, because the vast majority of distillers want to get as much alcohol as they can. It's very, very simple. So that's the main focus. So you've got to get, like you said before, whether the crop is healthy and whether it's able to get off the field is one part. But then how it performs in the micromaltings, how it performs in the distillery is a really, really important part. And because Scotland, the vast majority of what's grown is going for to make whiskey, that's what's driving the learning and the breeding and all that kind of stuff. So it's an interesting kind of topic. And as I say, it's why we start to think about that, and we start to think, well, let's try some Golden Promise, and we'll keep going the bear barley, and and all these kind of things. So the future, I mean, who knows? There's lots of interesting topics, and we could be stood here in a few years tasting some whiskies that are very, very different, which will be very interesting.
Absolutely. Shall we? Are we having technical difficulties? Should we take a pause?
Yeah, maybe.
No, keep going. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Let's keep going.
Lovely. Well, that's great. And technical difficulties just solved like that. That's superb. Well done, Nick. Well done, team. Good. So we should probably move on to our next draft, our last draft.
Okay.
I think that's the sensible thing to do at this time of night, is to continue drinking responsibly. So, Hunter, this is an interesting dram because we've tasted the other two. They're from specific farms or from specific places. The whiskey that was distilled back in 2011 from this came from basically 10 farms that were grown in 2011. So when we talk about the logistics, as we have grown more, we've got more people growing barley for us. All the barley is coming down. We don't have, or back in 2011, the same way of segregating that barley. So essentially everything comes in together, and it becomes more about Islay barley rather than control barley or Sunderland barley.
Yes.
And so I think this is interesting when we taste it. This is because the same thing will have happened with barley we buy from the mainland. Barley that comes from the maltings. It will be not necessarily.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily be from a single farm.
No,
it isn't.
It isn't.
Absolutely not.
It comes from I think from Bez Maltings, a 50-mile radius of maltings. But that's as specific as we can be for the loads we get for that particular type of barley. And it's interesting when you taste something that's distilled from mainland Scotland, from the north of Scotland, and then you taste something that's the product of Islay, of all the farmers, of all the contributors into this. And again, when we're tasting this, the reason we've gone from the oldest whiskey down to the youngest whiskey, the 2011 here, is so that we can see the influence of the spirit more and more. So at the beginning we've got lots of leather notes, lots of oak notes. We've got less of that and more from the barley coming through. 8 is a kind of a good spot. 7 or 8 years old for Islay barley is a good spot where you get the balance of the oak and the balance of the barley, the influence of the barley. But this, there is less influence from the cask and more of the barley, of the spirit. So when we nose that, again, high strength. And this is an interesting one because the strength is 61.5, and it's 6 years old. When this was filled into casks, it was 68.8%. And for some reason, I do not know why, we have lost a lot of alcohol, lost a lot of strength in this. Maybe from where it's been positioned in the warehouse. It was matured in warehouse 4, which is just in the middle of the distillery here originally. Then we had to move some of those casks into Kiltorsa warehouse, which we've just built last year. So it's moved up there, it's sat on the very, very top. But somewhere in that time, since 2011, we've lost a lot of strength. This is
it seems like the almost opposite from what you would expect.
Yeah, you would think that this, usually whiskey less would maybe kind of 65 or 66%. But it seems to have lost a lot. And again, the mystery of whiskey, the things that happen in the warehouses, the things that happen during the maturation. It's all part of the fun.
Are you sure somebody didn't take some out and put some water in?
I can't be sure of that, no, but I would like to think it's a good question. It's
the
a good
warehouse
question.
boys with mayonnaise.
James Brown
jars.
wasn't in the warehouse at the time.
Well, usually we find that if James Brown is in the warehouse, he doesn't replace what he's taking. So usually the strength wouldn't go down. But obviously, if anyone from HMRC is watching, that doesn't happen. Anyway, moving swiftly on. So this is, as I say, distilled in 2011, in July 2011. The barley was grown in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the start of the as it's growing, and you start to see the logistics coming in, as I talked about before, that what we grow one year is harvested the next. And what we grow one year is harvested the same year and then distilled the next year. So I slight mistake there.
Yeah. 2 drams in.
I know, that's it. We've still got this one to get through. We'll stick together, we'll be all right. When you look at this, the legs, the texture, you can see they're a little bit closer together, but it indicates younger spirit, but still good quality, still good texture, a lot lighter in colour. Again, the influence of the cask is not as prevalent. And again, you get that youthfulness coming through. You really do. It's citrus. It's a lemon. It's floral. It's green fruit. So we were talking before about the apples being riper and the older. This is younger spirit. So the fruit is not as ripe. It's green. It's pear drops. You get barley flour. That gingery, spicy note again. A little bit of brown sugar, like muscovado sugar. Probably coming from the cask. I'll have a little taste. A little bit more fiery. A little bit more
fiery.
I find that. But again, it's got that same texture, that wonderful texture. It really coats the mouthfeel is really good, really coats your tongue. I'm getting more fruit. A lot more fruit. It's marine. And again, one of these days we're going to have to send out a tasting kit of like 6 drams so we can compare Islay barley 2004 with mainland barley 2004. But if you compare this, and I did this afternoon, I took some, because it seemed to me that there was just more than I'm used to. If you taste mainland grown barley, or whiskey grown from mainland grown barley, and then we take the Islay grown barley, there seems more flavour. It seems, maybe I'm just more proud of the Islay barley, I don't know, but it just seems like there's more to it. So I went out and I took a 2011 bourbon barrel at random of mainland grown barley and compared the two, and there's definitely a difference there. And you'll just have to take my word for it. But obviously you just have to trust me, I'm an honest guy most of the time. But there just feels like there's more to it. The barley is giving more. We maybe get yield, but it's more flavour.
More complex.
Yeah, there is more complexity to it, absolutely. Could be, and again, we look at this as a mixture of different barley varieties. Back in 2011, there's Concerto, Pupino, Publican grown as well. But it's interesting to come across that. We'll put a little splash of water in. Get this nice peaceful atmosphere, and all we can hear is the tapping away of keys and the tip tapping.
We're just tweeting just in case we're dropping off again. So if we do completely stop online, just come over to Twitter and we'll try and keep a few of the comments going.
Okay,
exactly.
Obviously, our witty comments are much more fun than
that's really what people
listening
tune in for.
anyway.
Actually, yeah. This is just a distraction until the next witty comment. This is to give you something to feed off.
So how do you feel that changed it?
You get a lot more. You get mint really coming through there. Really minty. Eucalyptus, and it's something again in the younger spirit we'll tend to find.
Last year, when I was combining my field, I smelled.
How many people get to say that?
Not many people do. No, I was going along, and I thought I'd looked after the field quite well. And every time I got to the bottom of the field, I got this tremendous smell of mint. Mm-hmm. And damn me, I got out the combine, went down, and there was whole bunches of wild mint growing into the field of barley.
Nice.
So you never know.
Yeah, well, this is it, and I think that's...
I still don't know how it got there.
Yeah.
But
You mean
quite
to
a
say
lot.
you didn't gather it up and make mojitos at home?
No,
I think a gin mojito with
I
bottles
think I was
would be
more
right on
interested in
check.
getting to the end of the field.
So,
But it was really surprising, and I've never seen that before.
that's incredible. I bet we say maybe there's something in there. You know, you never know. When the barley's grown with other plants, who knows? I think that's again coming from the distillation. You start to get the younger spirit around about this age. You start to get those kind of minty eucalyptus notes. Well, that's really coming through now, and it's from the young spirit. You know, when you get that youth in the spirit, these kind of flavors come through. It's kind of a citrus, you know, the kind of citrus you get from the oak, from that marine influence. You know, again, the marine and the citrus is kind of hand in hand. Those flavors are all kind of in the same kind of ballpark. So you really get that coming through, which again just speaks of the place where this whiskey has come from, where this barley has come from. So there we go. So I suppose if we open this up to the floor and see what people think of this, because as I mentioned before, it's interesting. You know, not often do people get to taste whiskey that hasn't been, you know, blended and tasted and prepared in a way that this is our release. This is what we present to you. This is just casks from the warehouse that showcase a point that we want to make. It's not necessarily a whiskey we would craft. It's something that is just interesting for people to understand the flavors. You've got nothing. You've got nothing, Chris.
You've got nothing.
No, I do.
Nothing.
My
Everyone's
number one
given up.
tweet right now is it's all gone a bit Pete Tong, but we
Right.
are chatting amongst ourselves. Don't panic to anyone who does want to watch this back, because we'll have a high definition screening next week. So don't panic. You'll get all the full chat, even if you can't hear it now.
Jolly
We'll
good.
try our best on the tech side. But in the meantime, we've got a couple of tasting notes. So John Egerton says he's getting a lovely honey lemon, almost hot toddy vibe from this one. And it's the standout dram of the evening.
Really?
And for Whiskey with Friends, I'm getting some mocha coffee notes on the nose for 2431, so
Interesting.
that's our last one.
Very interesting. Yeah, I like that comment. You know, a standout dram of the evening is the youngest one. You know, when you think you've got a 12, nearly 13-year-old whiskey, 8-year-old whiskey, the same kind of age and style as we're releasing here, and then the youngest one that we haven't really thought about. This is going to be coming up in a couple of years.
Yes.
You know, so it's interesting. But it obviously bodes well for the future. I think there's maybe two things we can take from that. That you know, we're learning as distillers more and more the flavors and you know where the flavors we get from Islay grown barley, where they sit in the spirit, where they where it should be bottled. And we've always thought it should be younger, because you allow the influence of the barley to come through without the influence of the cask. You know, so I think that's interesting.
So your experience is becoming more like that, because you'll have moved away. I mean, I'm just talking as a whiskey drinker. You'll have moved away from what was traditional to a philosophy that is different from where it used to be.
Yes.
And
Yes.
hopefully that's what you're now starting to pick up on.
Yeah, I think so. I think, as I say, the philosophy is a really important point for us, and the understanding, because you know our philosophy is that we the ingredients that we use to make whiskey should be the best that we can source.
Yeah.
You know, and understanding the provenance, understanding where it comes from, and you know that gives it a sense of place. You know, when we make whiskey on Islay, we talk so much. All the distilleries talk so much about the place, you know, where it's made from, and the name, and you know the water and where it comes from. But nobody talks about the barley.
No,
in
they
the
don't.
industry. And that's an interesting thing. You know, that maybe you hear more stories about the water you use to make whiskey, which is important, and less about the barley. But the barley is where you're creating the flavour. It's the point that you create your flavour from. So I think it's very, very interesting. So we've always been very interested in, you know, pulling the lid back and talking about these things. So it's been great to have you tonight and to talk about, you know, in a really factual way, a really interesting way about the mechanics and the interesting things that
Go anywhere for a free dram.
3 free drams. 3
Free drams, yes.
But there's a question I was wanting to ask you, Hunter, about the whiskey or that we make, the Islay grown whiskey from Islay grown barley. The 2010, which is behind us here. That one. Your name is mentioned on this. Your farm is mentioned.
The farm
on
is,
this.
yes.
Yeah. How do you feel about that? You know, to grow a crop and then see where it goes.
Well, I think the tie-up between the farmers and the distillery is an extra. I guess it's a pat in the back. You know, it's one of these things. Most farmers like to go out there, they do their thing, whether it's cattle, sheep, barley, whatever it's going to be, but they like their peers to recognise them as doing something good.
Yes.
And if people come up to you and say, gosh, that's a good looking calf, or that field of barley is looking really well, do you know, you really get a bit of a wee bit of a fillip. And there's no doubt seeing a name on a bottle of whiskey is excellent. It's a great feeling. My mother-in-law's bought dozens of the buggers, you know, because her farm is the original farm of Cruach. So you know, so she's bought lots, and all the family get one, and you know, it's great. So she's as proud of it as anybody, and she's not even growing it.
There you go. That's an amazing thing.
No, it's a great thing to be part of. And long may it continue. I'm really quite pleased to be part of it.
It's a tremendous thing, and I think the other side of that is that I think everyone who lives in Islay, everyone who's grown up in Islay, it's the most important place in the world. And to be making whiskey is a dream come true for me, and I always think how lucky I am. But to be making whiskey with barley that's grown here, it's always going to be more special to me. You know, as good as everything else we make is, this will always be something very, very special.
If you're way up in Strathspey and you're making 20 million litres a year of quite a nice whiskey, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of very nice whiskies, but there's no real connection with what's going on around them. They buy the barley from whichever malts it's coming. It could be from anywhere. It can't just give them the same satisfaction that you would get and that we would get from supplying it.
Yeah, and that's it. Well, there you go. You heard it here first.
Is that fair?
That's the one.
Is that the right answer?
That's the right answer. Absolutely.
Oh, jolly good.
Absolutely. But I think that's it. You know, drinking something like this, making something like this, to be able to produce this, and something that I think a lot of people in the whiskey industry sometimes forget is that, you know, we talk about crafting this whiskey and craftsmanship, and we are not the first craftsmen involved at all. No. The farmers, the maltsters, the coopers, you know, everybody is playing a part, and we are taking the final stage.
Your father's father, your father's father's father.
Exactly.
You know, you're just the next in the line that's making it, and what you're trying to do is improve on what anybody else has done before you, as we all are.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Good to hear Mrs. Jackson's keeping us all in a job as well. We're buying all the stock. So.
It's always very nice.
It was my mother-in-law. It's Mrs. Smith.
Sorry. I do apologise.
Although Caroline would keep you in a job with black art, never mind the Irish stuff.
Obviously, a woman with taste.
Do we have any more comments from people? Are we still online?
I think we're dipping in and out, but we'll just keep going, and everyone.
Have we bored everybody to tears?
No, I don't think so. Well, certainly not us anyway.
No, it's been great.
We do this as much for each other as we do for everyone else that's watching outside. Kind of moving away a little bit from the barley now. It's not something we've talked a lot about this evening, but how do we store the barrels? And in contact with weather conditions like wind and temperature, or are they kept in a controlled environment? It's from Jason.
So it's, thank you, Jason. It's not controlled in any way, except there's locks on the door to keep people out. That's the only control we have. So the barrels that we buy, and again, we talk about the different spirit types we have, and Islay barley being one of them. We make basically about 13 different spirit types across the range, and amongst those 13 spirit types, when we fill it into casks, we have about 280 different varieties of casks in the warehouses. All the warehouses are on Islay, of course. 280 different types of casks, and it could be that it's a bourbon barrel. It's one, a fresh bourbon barrel, but a second full barrel will be the next one. They're not the same type of cask that you've used at once. So across everything, there's 280 different types of casks, which is quite incredible. But we store those casks in a few different ways. We have dunnage warehouses, so traditional warehouses that are round about us in the distillery here. We have racking warehouses where we utilise obviously metal racking, and we store very, very high. And the temperature differences and the way these barrels, the climate or the micro-provenance, the climate they're in, will be different. So the maturation will be slightly different for each one. The very top of a tall warehouse, the racking warehouse, will be a lot hotter. When we do get a nice dry day, a nice sunny day, the temperature at the top is a lot warmer than at the bottom. Interestingly enough, you know, if you mature for quite a long time, quite a cool kind of climate that's the same all the time is quite good for maturing whiskey. So the very first whiskey we tasted was matured in the very bottom of that warehouse, so it was very cool all the time. You get a very different maturation if the temperature difference, the humidity, everything is different. We do not control that though.
Yep.
That's just purely natural, you know. Some of the warehouses have iron bars on the windows, no glass. So if the rain comes in, the wind comes in. That's a good thing. We like to have the airflow around the casks. So, for example, when we build new warehouses, we make sure we have space around the casks.
Yep.
A little bit more expensive. Everybody wants to kind of have less space, but again, if we're maturing an Islay, we're doing it for a reason, because the air that the cask is breathing is interacting with the whiskey. That marine influence, that flavours that we want. The reason we do that here is to get those flavours. So we don't control anything, as I say, apart from keeping people out, which is a good thing.
And with less cattle on the island and no need for grass, we've got plenty of room for warehouses, so we can just keep building them and keep creating
like
more space.
Absolutely. Yeah,
The circle is full. And a question from Soren Krebs, with the high ABV that you're putting into the cask, so at a higher ABV, what advantage does this give?
It gives us a few advantages. I mean, I think one, it feels like a more natural thing for us to do. I think we've talked about this a few times, but it's very fundamental reasons that when you ask a lot of people, you know, why do you fill at 63.5? I don't know. It's just what we've always done. You know, so there's this kind of thing that's just what happens, and the traditions get passed down. But you know, when you go back to 2001 and you look at this blank canvas, this fresh opportunity, should we do it at 63.5 like we've always done, or let's fill it at cask strength or at still strength and see what happens? At the higher strength, you know, we feel that you get a better interaction with the wood, a more aggressive interaction with the wood, so we pull more flavour from the cask. Because we are distilling really slowly, really well, our spirit, we don't feel it. It's fantastic to drink as it is. We don't feel the need to have to water it down because it's too harsh or too aggressive. There's wonderful balance in it, so you know, let's leave it as it is. Let's not bother adding water. We get a different interaction with the flavours, but you know what? It's okay.
I don't know how you feel about it. I don't know how much you drink other distilleries' whiskies, but now it's quite a shock to me if I go back to drinking something else. That when I taste something and I go, oh, this feels like it really lacks body, almost. And I fully believe that's the higher ABV that does that, that keeps the oils in there.
Absolutely. I agree that quite a lot. I mean, sometimes you taste the whiskey, and there are many fantastic whiskies out there. And I'm contractually obliged to only drink Bruichladdich, but sometimes I sneak a little dram of something else. But you get the difference. I think it just reinforces with us why we do these things, because we enjoy the flavour of this whiskey. You know, all the whiskies that we make, and it's about the texture, it's about the flavour, it's about the style we get. And I think that high strength. I mean, we've got our kind of standard expressions are at 50% ABV, and I was at a Remy conference a few weeks ago. We were, to digress, sorry, we were talking to all the different houses, all the different brands were talking about what they do. And I was talking about some of the whiskies, and I said, and we bottle this one, it's only at 50%. Because to me, that's a low strength. And people are like, well, 50 is, what? Wow. 50 is strong, what are you talking about? But because it's well distilled, because it's taking a small middle cut, it's about getting quality, 50% doesn't feel like what you assume 50% would be.
Yeah, and for me, it's always a bonus because you can add a drop of water, makes your dram go a little bit further. So sometimes when I say to people that I work for a company and kind of our entry-level whiskies like 40, 42 pounds a bottle, they kind of bulk at that. But when you think about the care that's gone into making your whiskey and how slowly we want you to enjoy it and how far it'll go, I think...
It's very true.
I mean, I'm biased anyway, but I think it's worth it.
We're all biased. We're all doing good things.
No, we're not. I do enjoy my Bruichladdich whiskey, but I have to say I had a really good Japanese one on Saturday night at a friend's dinner, which blew me away. I thought, wow, that's unusual. I did not expect that. Yeah,
they're very smooth, easy. I think you can get quite carried away with it.
Yes.
I don't think you were carried away. We would have had. But there we go. So do we have any more questions?
Yeah, let's have a couple of closing ones. We've got one from Whiskey with Friends, who is asking if there will ever be a new PC whiskey, or was PC 12 the last one?
Interesting. Well, don't know is the answer to that. Don't know. I have some ideas. I always have some ideas, and I think that watch this space. You know, I think that Port Charlotte as a brand, there's some exciting things coming. Some really exciting things coming. I'm going to tell everybody this now, and you remember where you were when I told you. Port Charlotte is going to take over the world. The whiskey world, but honestly, Port Charlotte is going to take over everything. It is unbelievable. So really exciting things. PC12, which I think is up here behind us. It's a step in the road. There's a long way to go. Some really interesting things. But people, again, this is something that one of my ideas. One of these things is that people always think that PC series we went from 5, 6, 7, 8 to 12, all the way up there one by one. What if we went the other way? What if we did PC4, PC3? Could be some interesting ideas there as well. So watch this space.
Look at us all sitting nervously like, Adam's going to tell everyone the secrets, because that's what he always does in an MP
really try not to. I'm really trying not to.
Good for you.
No.
What in the world of whiskey outside Laddie is inspiring you right now?
In the world of whiskey?
Yes.
Do you know, it's interesting actually, everything. When you see the way that the whiskey industry is moving and the conversations that people are having, and like the conversations we've been having tonight, talking about barley, talking about some of the things we've been talking about, that's what inspires me. I don't think you ever really get bored. I don't think there's always so many things to talk about. I mean, I'm having a conversation today with James Donaldson, who's our botanist, our forager for the botanist gin, and we were talking about peat. And 10 years ago you would talk about peat and it would be how peaty is your whiskey. Now you're talking about where does the peat come from, Is it hand cut, is it machine cut, where...
How deep is it, how black is it?
Exactly, all this kind of stuff, and that's the flavours that are going into whiskey. So I think that's the things that kind of inspire me, the conversation, the interest that people have in whiskey. So we're always learning, we don't have all the answers, we might pretend we do, but we're learning and we're experiencing, and this is what this journey is all about. It's one of the factors that the terroir, the influence of the land, the influence of the barley, the influence of the soil, this is what's coming through in whiskey. Whiskey is a natural product. So all of these things start to inspire me. What about yourself, Hunter?
Well, I sort of have a foot in all sorts of camps because my nephew's now the manager at Glenfiddich, and he was at Balvenie, so we see a bit of that. I am from the mainland. I'm an interloper, so I've been used to quite a lot of different influences from over there. I have to say, I mean, the Bruichladdich experience is different, and I think that in itself stands out for me. What concerns me, though, and it's only a concern, is that you've now got another distillery getting built on Islay. There's a potential for another one after that. My worry is if they don't produce something that's outstandingly good, will that drag the rest of Islay down? And that's the one thing I am concerned about.
Actually, it's a really interesting point because we hear a lot about Islay as a category, Islay single malt or Highland or Lowland or Speyside, the Islay as a category. But when you think of the distilleries producing whiskey in Islay, they're all completely individual, and there are similarities between some. Okay, we make peated whiskey, we make peated whiskey, but maybe Bunnahabhain and Bruichladdich are kind of unique in that the styles are unpeated. So there's something that's at odds with that category straight away. And I think as you start to think about what Kilchoman do and how different they are to Lafroig and Bowmore, and yet these brands are fantastic, and there's a huge interest in them. I think the reputation that Islay distilleries have, that if whatever you do, if you put Islay single malt on a bottle, you're going to get people interested. But I think that reputation keeps the distiller honest. I think that keeps you have something to aim for, a reputation to keep. And I think it'll be interesting to see. And of course, up at Ardnahoe, there's a guy involved up there. I don't know if anyone heard of Jim McEwen before. But he seems he's been involved in whiskey a long time. He seems to know what he's doing. So I think when you have people from Islay making whiskey, if you're involved, I think you're always going to do something right because there's a passion, there's a belief in doing the right things, and a reputation to uphold. So it's a challenge for sure, but I think I hope, and I'm pretty positive and pretty excited by the new distilleries, and I think it's a great thing. It brings more interest. It keeps the conversation going for us all. So fingers crossed.
Good. Yeah. A positive outlook.
I've got one last one for you.
Okay.
And just before we go on to the last one, it prompts me to remind everyone that you might have seen already, we've put an article on the website this week just explaining that the Laddie MP8 kits are not going on sale as usual. So normally we would sell the kits all on the day of the previous tasting. So we should have sold all of them today. but we've changed the format a little bit. We want to limit the kits to 1 per person so that we're seeing less of them on auction sites, hopefully, and so that more people have the opportunity to buy them. We're going to wait until we are sure that we've fixed some of the web issues that we've had. And we're also not as comfortable anymore with pre-selling. So we don't particularly enjoy taking your money and then taking us 2 months to get a product out to everyone. So we're going to wait a little bit for this one and let Adam handpick the casks for the next tasting, which will be
the
in
real
January.
reason is I haven't picked them yet, isn't it?
No, of course not.
That's very good.
So yeah, we'll wait until you pick them, then we'll bottle them, and then we'll post them straight away, and hopefully we'll manage to get that out before the Christmas rush. So anyone who's interested in taking part in the next one, just make sure that you're on our mailing list, the what we call the Progressive Hebridean News, and you've got the opportunity to sign up for that on our website at the bottom of every page. And for the last question, where would you like to go next with the MP series? So what can we expect in the future?
I don't know if I'm allowed to say, because you've told me a few times that I keep giving away all the secrets.
No.
I'm allowed to?
For this, I'll
for
give
this
you
one?
permission.
Okay. So what I'm looking at for the next one would be a Port Charlotte Isle of Barley, and because I missed the last Octomore, we may do an Octomore Isle of Barley. But I think the interesting thing about this is that we, like a lot of things we do, we don't set the plan ahead of us. You know, we don't go too deep into it. We'll kind of see what's interesting and what's happening at the time. It could be just, 3 fantastic casks we find in the warehouse. We could, there's lots of interesting things to look at.
Quite exciting.
Yeah.
Just like Adam's favourite from the warehouse. No theme, no rhyme or reason.
that was one of the, I can't remember, it was maybe the second or third one we did. It was coming up for Christmas time, and we were getting it done, and I thought, you know what, it's Christmas time, let's just have 3 nice drams. Let's just do something that I went out and picked 3 wonderful drams, and there we are.
Is this the one when Mary came in before we'd announced it?
I think it was,
when we used to do it blind.
And then the next one we hid in the warehouse to get away from it.
Is this the sherry cask?
We have fun.
Keeps us on our toes.
But you never know, I mean, depending on if I can slip this one under the radar, we could do a black hat. No, we probably could do a black hat. We probably could do a black hat one, but who knows? Quick. Who knows? I think whatever we find is interesting. Cask types, it could be spirit types, it could be age, it could be so many things, so many factors. We'll hopefully explore them all as we go. You
do run the place, don't you? I'm sure.
Well, when Alan's not here, yes. But other time,
We'll send him off to Taiwan. Yeah. We'll slip a black art MP in there.
Well, let's try and do that. That sounds like fun. So I think, without further ado, we should all say thank you to Hunter for coming this evening. So thank you very much, Hunter. That's very good. It's a really, really interesting chat. Thank you from the gallery.
Well, different for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Really interesting.
A little bit different. Yeah.
Really interesting. I think it's always good to see more and learn more about what goes on behind the scenes. So thank you very much. To the team fielding the questions and the technical team who might have done all right, maybe not. I don't know. Performance review on Monday. We'll see how we get on. But no, thank you everybody involved. Thank you all for watching. And the last thing before we go, Hunter, for giving up your time.
Oh, I get one of my own. Good.
This is one of your own. Thank you. I know you've got a few in the house, obviously, but that's for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Wow.
There we are. And now you can open it.
Now we can open it. Yeah, we're all sharing it now.
No, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for watching.
Thank you.
Cheerio.